The atmosphere in the venue was electrically tense. The venue's lights began to flicker, illuminating a fervent and expectant audience. Everyone there knew what the night would hold, but few could have predicted what was about to unfold. The air seemed charged with the buzz of conversation among fans, all eager for the arrival of one of contemporary music's most controversial and beloved artists. Amy Winehouse's presence never went unnoticed, but that night, something felt different. The songs began to play softly in the background, blending with the growing murmur of the audience. A few curious glances exchanged among the waiting crowd, wondering what the show would be like this time. Amy had always been an unpredictable artist. Her rebellious personality and unique style, which constantly flitted with the limits of convention, were her trademarks. But what the audience didn't know was that the radical change that would occur that night wasn't just about her musical performance, but something deeper. The stage lights finally came on, instantly silencing the audience. Tension mounted. All eyes were fixed on the center of the stage, where Amy Winehouse's silhouette began to form in the dim light. She was about to enter. As usual, the audience prepared to see the diva, known for her irreverent and unpredictable style. What could it be this time? New songs? A daring performance? Perhaps an unusual reaction from the artist, like so many others that have marked her career? What was going through the fans' minds was a mixture of euphoria and apprehension. Each of Amy's shows was a surprise. Her demeanor often ranged from captivating to disconcerting, but that was precisely what made her a living legend. She always defied industry norms, and the curiosity about what would happen at her next performance became a fascinating mystery. The anticipation generated by her enigmatic figure made the audience surrender to every chord, every word, every gesture. And that night, without a doubt, would be no different, or at least that's what everyone thought. But no one imagined that what lay ahead would be something far more daring than anyone could have anticipated. When Amy took the stage, no one knew she was about to break the barriers of what everyone expected, generating an explosive reaction no one could have anticipated. The moment the artist prepared to sing, the audience seemed to already know something amazing was about to happen. Something that would not only define her as an artist, but also change the public's perception of her forever. Amy Winehouse was always much more than a talented singer. She embodied a unique rebelliousness that defied music industry conventions, becoming an iconic figure not only for her powerful voice, but also for the way she dealt with fame and her own personal limitations. From the beginning of her career, Amy was seen as an artist who didn't fit into any mold. Her musical style, which blended jazz, soul, and R&B with touches of an irreverent personality, reflected her raw and genuine approach to life. Her image was as bold as her music. Her voluminous hair, smoky eyeliner, and vintage style became her trademarks, as did her defiant and often brash demeanor. Amy wasn't your typical pop diva. She didn't care about beauty standards or the polish required by the industry. She was real, raw, and unfiltered. Her authenticity, while appealing to many, also made her a constant target of criticism, especially from the tabloid media, which loved to exploit her personal life and the turbulent episodes of her career. But what truly made her special was her ability to channel her emotions and personal experiences into her music. Her lyrics, often filled with pain and vulnerability, reflected a woman who lived intensely, both her triumphs and her downfalls. Each song felt like an open window into her heart and mind, and her fans connected deeply with that. The track, Rehab, became a true anthem of resistance against social stigmas, but it also revealed an internal struggle that many were unaware of. Although scandals and controversies surrounded her public persona, her music remained undeniably powerful. She wasn't afraid to be who she was, even if it meant going against the expectations of a society that often demanded artists be perfect, well-behaved and flawless. Amy broke these norms with a defiant smile. And it was this attitude, this refusal to follow rules, that made her one of the most fascinating artists of her generation. Her authenticity and boldness conquered the world, but also put her in a constant battle against her own demonic limitations. At her shows, Amy wasn't just a performer on stage. She was a storm of emotions, a force of nature that fans couldn't predict, but who also mesmerized them. Each performance was a dance between undeniable talent and raw vulnerability. Fans knew that when they came to see her, they would be witnessing something unforgettable, but also unpredictable. And perhaps that was the most compelling thing about her, the notion that each show could be a masterpiece or a disaster, but either way, it would be an experience no one would ever forget. Because of all this, the anticipation for Amy Winehouse's next show wasn't just a wait for a musical performance, but an anticipation of the unexpected. What would she do that night? The big question was, would Amy, as always, be willing to defy everyone and everything once again? Or would she do something completely unexpected, something that would make the audience wonder who the real Amy Winehouse really was? That was the question everyone wanted answered, and the big change was about to happen. The venue was about to erupt in a collective scream. The lights in the venue began to flicker more intensely, as if anticipating what was to come. The background music intensified, and the anxious murmurs among the fans grew in volume, like a wave about to break. The stage was still immersed in darkness, with only a shadow of a silhouette visible. The audience was mesmerized by the anticipation. Every second felt like an eternity. No one wanted to miss a single movement. The feeling in the air was electrically charged, as if the entire room were on the verge of a major event. The clock was about to strike, and everyone was ready to see what Amy would do next. Finally, the stage lights came on in an intense glow, revealing the figure of Amy Winehouse. She appeared at the front, her posture unmistakable, her gaze piercing. Her voluminous hair, heavy makeup and vintage style were all there, as characteristic as ever. But something in her gaze, something in her energy felt different. The audience applauded enthusiastically. Her fans chanted her name in an explosion of adoration. They loved her, but at that moment, they didn't yet know what to expect. The audience was mesmerized by the power of her presence, as if the next few minutes would be a spectacle of pure magic. Amy was there, center stage, ready to surrender herself to her audience. The music began, Amy's voice bursting into life, but something was about to break the mold. Her body moved with a disconcerting fluidity, yet at the same time, there was something tense about the way she seemed to connect with the music. The audience watched her intently, as if waiting for some change, some indication that something wasn't what they knew. Amy, with her unpredictable temperament, seemed to walk a fine line between perfection and imperfection. Everyone knew her. Shows could be both transcendent and chaotic, but no one knew what it would be like this time. The fans were immersed in the moment, and Amy's music transported them to a parallel universe where reality seemed suspended. But there was a sense in the air, a sense that everything happening there, even the words of her songs, was more than just a performance. It was a reflection of her own life, the ups and downs, the internal struggles, and the raw energy she channeled onto the stage. Every note that left her mouth was a cry of authenticity, an invitation for her own soul to be seen. The audience was completely surrendered. But deep down, everyone sensed something was about to happen. Something that would change the course of the night. What no one knew, however, was that Amy's radical change wouldn't just be in her songs or her stage presence. The real surprise was about to be revealed. What the audience couldn't have predicted was that Amy, the woman who stood out for not following any norms, was about to defy expectations even further. And it would have nothing to do with the music or what was happening on stage. Something in the air told them the night was still full of surprises, and if you thought you already knew what to expect from Amy Winehouse, you were completely wrong. The seconds dragged on until the moment everyone was waiting for, and the suspense grew. The audience was so absorbed in the energy of the show that when the change finally happened, it would be impossible to turn back. The real impact would be generated by the shattering of an image everyone had created, by the revelation of something unexpected that would challenge even Amy's most loyal fans. She was ready to show, once again, that no one had control over who she was. And then, when no one expected it, Amy did something no one could have predicted. The audience, already completely immersed in the performance, fell silent as she stepped forward onto the stage, her silhouette dramatically illuminated by the intense light surrounding her. It was there, in that moment, that Amy revealed what she had been preparing, something much more than a simple change in style or posture, something that went beyond what the audience imagined possible. In an abrupt movement, she removed the microphone from its stand and instead of singing, made a bold gesture that left the audience stunned. With a determined look, she grabbed the sunglasses she always wore on her head and placed them over her eyes, something seemingly trivial but charged with profound symbolism. It wasn't just about appearance, it was about an internal transformation she was about to expose. With a wry smile, Amy spoke a few words, something brief, but with the weight of a manifesto. What she said left everyone stunned. "Today, I'm not who you think I am anymore. Brace yourselves." The audience fell silent. Amy's words reverberated, but it was the energy with which she said them that made a visceral impact. She was no longer just defying expectations, she was defying her own public identity. What followed was a moment of pure tension, a prelude to something radically different. The audience didn't know how to react. Some began to applaud, trying to understand what she meant by that enigmatic line. Others were confused, unsure if it was part of the show or something truly out of the ordinary. But then the transformation took shape. Amy, who had always been the embodiment of irreverence and a traditionally subversive style, began to change before everyone's eyes. Her posture, her way of moving on stage, her energy, everything was different. She was no longer Amy Winehouse as the world knew her. It was as if she had left behind the image she had built over the years and, in doing so, made room for something new but also unpredictable. The change wasn't just in appearance or demeanor. It was a radical reinterpretation of her own image. And her art, the way she delivered herself to her music, was also transformed. Instead of the emotional, visceral delivery she was known for, her performance seemed more calculated, almost disconcerting. The transition from the soulful singer to the controlled, mysterious artist was taking place before the audience's eyes. She was rebuilding herself there, on stage, in front of everyone, and the audience, in a mixture of shock and admiration, realized that not only her image was changing, but the very essence of the artist. The audience's reaction reflected what Amy was doing, something completely unexpected and unusual. Some applauded, others fell silent, trying to understand what was happening, while others began to whisper to each other, seeking answers to the enigmatic transformation they were witnessing. It was as if, in that moment, Amy was no longer just a famous singer, but an artist who was breaking free from all the expectations the world had of her, breaking down barriers between her public image and what she truly wanted to express. With that gesture, Amy Winehouse wasn't just reinventing herself artistically, she was actually challenging the very narrative the media and the public had constructed around her. And with that, She not only surprised, but also generated a controlled revolt, a sense of loss of control among spectators who had grown accustomed to seeing a specific version of Amy, now undone in real time. What was happening on that stage was no longer a simple concert. It was an act of artistic resistance. The impact was immediate. The audience fell silent, as if time had stopped for a second. That transformation, that abrupt and bold change in Amy Winehouse, left everyone speechless. Some fans looked at each other, as if trying to comprehend what had happened. The atmosphere was charged with a palpable tension. The excitement that had previously filled the room transformed into a strange and uncomfortable sensation, as if everyone was facing something they could not control. For many, Amy had always been the very embodiment of authenticity, a woman who defied everything, and everyone with her unique voice and uncompromising attitude. But now, she seemed to have crossed an invisible line, something fans weren't ready to accept. It was as if she had suddenly become a different version of herself, someone who could not be fully understood or predicted. The audience, which had previously thrilled with her music and irreverent style, was now faced with a new Amy, a disconcerting figure who caused more confusion than admiration. The first few seconds of silence were followed by an explosion of murmurs and whispers. Some fans, perplexed, began asking each other if this was part of the show, if it was a planned performance. Others, more critical, couldn't hide the disappointment on their faces. The shock was visible in every corner of the auditorium, an audience that until then had given itself over to the artist with open hearts was now torn between admiration and doubt. Has she really changed? Is this just a phase, or is she moving away from everything she once was? Is she still the same Amy? These questions began to circulate, and confusion filled the room. Loyal fans tried to remain calm, but the uncertainty was contagious. The vibrant, spontaneous energy that normally filled the room with laughter and applause was now replaced by a dense, uncomfortable atmosphere. Some began chanting Amy's name, but their voices lacked the same enthusiasm as before. It was as if they were trying to reclaim something lost, something that seemed to have dissipated the moment she revealed her new image. However, there was also a minority who saw something much deeper in that moment. These fans, perhaps the most hardened and aware of Amy's complexity as an artist, began to applaud vigorously. They saw this moment as a statement of authenticity, proof that Amy would never follow the easy or predictable path. They knew that, disconcerting as it was, this change was a powerful statement about who she truly was, free from external expectations and pressures. For these fans, the reaction wasn't shock, but pride. She's being true to herself, they thought. Even so, most of the audience was in shock. The change was so abrupt and unexpected that they couldn't process it immediately. Some people, visibly disconcerted, began to leave the venue, making it clear they weren't willing to accept Amy's change without a clear explanation. Others, more curious, remained in the venue, watching, waiting to see what would happen next. The audience was divided. One part felt betrayed by the artist they knew and loved, while the other saw a new side of Amy, something she might need to reinvent herself and continue evolving. The tension only grew as Amy stood on stage, watching the audience with an enigmatic, almost defiant smile. She knew she'd made an impact, and she seemed almost amused by the mixed reaction she was generating. For her, this was another moment of genuine artistic expression, a way to show the world that she would never simply be the version everyone expected of her. She was there to defy convention, to make her fans rethink their own relationship with the artist they'd built in their minds. Meanwhile, the murmurs in the auditorium grew increasingly intense, with discussions about what this change represented. But no one had a definitive answer. Only one certainty hung in the air. Amy Winehouse was no longer simply the artist she'd always been. She was becoming something more complex, more multifaceted, more mysterious. And regardless of how it was received, she knew she had made the decision to follow her own path, no matter the consequences. What would happen next? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: the world was seeing a new Amy Winehouse, and the audience wasn't yet ready to understand what that meant. As the initial shock began to give way to a wave of discussion, in the audience, Amy Winehouse finally spoke again. With a subtle smile and a piercing gaze, she made a gesture that seemed to invite everyone to be quiet and listen. What she was about to say was not just an explanation, but a statement of intent. "I know you were expecting something different from me," Amy said, her voice piercing the tense silence that had settled over her. "But do you know me so well? Or was I molded into something you wanted to see, not who I really am?" The audience fell silent instantly, and those words resonated like a kind of outburst, as if Amy were sharing a deep thought, something she'd perhaps been harboring for a long time. She paused, seeming to measure her words. The audience was completely focused on her now, absorbing every syllable. "I'm tired of living up to other people's expectations. I'm tired of being who you think I am. What you see here isn't a performance. This is freedom. This is who I am, unfiltered." The words fell hard, like a brutal truth she had avoided revealing for some time. The audience, previously skeptical, now saw a new side of Amy, a version of herself unshackled by the public image that had haunted her for so long. The impact of her words was immediate, but it was her gaze, that steady, serene gaze, that truly made the difference. Amy no longer seemed concerned with the public's opinion. She seemed freed from everything that had imprisoned her. This change wasn't just aesthetic. It wasn't just a new style or a quirky performance. It was an internal transformation, a reinterpretation of who she was and what she wanted for the future. The reason behind this radical change, then, revealed itself as an act of self-sufficiency and courage. Amy was no longer just defying music industry conventions. She was challenging her own image, shattering the image the media had constructed around her. What the world saw as an image of Amy Winehouse, the rebellious artist, the troubled woman, the tormented singer, was now crumbling before their eyes. She was ceasing to be a character and becoming a real person, with complexity, vulnerability, and the right to reinvent herself. The audience, which had previously felt lost and disoriented, now began to realize that this wasn't a simple change in style. It wasn't a whim or a random performance. It was a search for authenticity. Amy was expressing in simple words what many artists feel, but few have the courage to say, that the pressure to fit into a predefined image is overwhelming. For her, it was a burden, and that night, on that stage, was her form of liberation. This wasn't a momentary change. It was a re-evaluation of her own place in the world. The stunned audience watched as Amy Winehouse completely transformed. Not just in appearance, but in soul. She was finally being herself, unfiltered, uncompromising, unconcerned about what others thought. This change wasn't something superficial, but a profound personal reinvention that had perhaps been happening for a long time. But that night became public in an unexpected and bold way. What she was saying was simple, yet powerful. "I'm not what you imagine. I'm so much more than that, and tonight I'm here to show you who I really am." As Amy's words echoed across the stage, it was clear she wasn't seeking approval, but a genuine connection with her audience. She wanted others to see not just an artist, but a person who was constantly evolving, who allowed herself to change, grow, and above all be true to herself. And perhaps in doing so, she was giving her fans the right to do the same, to free themselves from expectations and the pressure to conform to an image that didn't belong to them. Amy Winehouse's transformation was much more than an image transformation. It was a personal revolution, an affirmation of identity, something only she could control. When Amy Winehouse made her radical change, something much deeper was at stake. She wasn't just superficially reinventing herself, but continuing a tradition of major artistic transformations that have marked the history of music and pop culture. Suddenly, her name was placed alongside other legends who had also defied public expectations, boldly shaped their public images, and in many cases changed the course of art for their respective generations. One of the most obvious comparisons was to David Bowie. Bowie, throughout his career, became a master of reinvention. He not only drastically changed his physical appearance and musical style, but also challenged concepts of gender, identity, and performance. His various incarnations, from Ziggy Stardust to the Thin White Duke, represented an ongoing commitment to artistic and personal freedom, allowing him to explore new forms of expression without fear of what others might think. Like Bowie, Amy also used her transformation to free herself from the limitations imposed by her own public image. She, like him, was unafraid to distance herself from expectations, to assert her autonomy as an artist and as a person. Another pertinent example was Madonna, who, over the decades, has been an icon of constant reinvention. Each phase of her career was marked by changes not only in her musical style, but also in the way she presented herself to the public. Whether in the early days, with the provocative Like a Virgin, or in the more mature phase of Ray of Light, Madonna always knew how to reinvent herself to remain relevant, challenging the norm, embracing provocation, and changing whatever was necessary to maintain her innovative figure. Like Madonna, Amy did this to express her true identity and desires, without being confined to the image society wanted her to be. Both defied public expectations, but with a greater purpose: artistic freedom. A more recent comparison, albeit with a different approach, could be made with Lady Gaga. From the beginning of her career, Gaga challenged the mainstream with her eccentric style and provocative performances. She became a pop icon by embracing the idea that art need not be limited by conventional standards of beauty or behavior. Like Lady Gaga, Amy was unafraid to take risks, to expose herself vulnerably, and to make others question how they viewed art and the lives of artists. Amy not only became a powerful voice, but also a platform for resistance against preconceived ideas about what a woman should be, especially in a landscape so saturated with standards of perfection. However, the fundamental difference between Amy and these iconic figures is that she wasn't seeking fame or acceptance. Her transformation wasn't a marketing strategy, but a personal necessity. While Bowie and Madonna in some ways shaped their reinventions, as part of their artistic careers, Amy was searching for something much more intimate and essential. Her radical transformation wasn't meant to provoke merely an aesthetic or intellectual reaction, but rather to free herself from an internal weight that she felt was preventing her from being fully herself. She wasn't just taking control of her art, she was reclaiming control of her own narrative. It was a personal and artistic revolution, a search for authenticity without regard for the consequences. Thus, Amy Winehouse stands alongside these icons, not only because of her superficial image change, but because of the profound meaning it carries. She wasn't afraid of being misunderstood or rejected. On the contrary, her radical transformation seemed to be a reaction to the fact that she had always been seen incompletely by the media, the public, and even by herself. By finally breaking free from all this, she not only reinvented herself, but in doing so, made history. She proved that true art isn't about pleasing or conforming to external expectations, but about staying true to yourself, no matter how uncomfortable or unexpected that may be for others. She, like Bowie, Madonna, and Lady Gaga, made change a statement of power, an affirmation of identity that transcended convention. Amy Winehouse's radical transformation at that concert wasn't just a stylistic shift or an attempt to provoke her audience. It was a profound decision that had unpredictable repercussions on her career. For many, the change represented a break with the public image she had carefully constructed over the years, one steeped in rebellion, sensuality, and vulnerability. For others, it was a statement of her authenticity, a way to show that, despite her personal and professional ups and downs, she still had control over her own narrative. In the days following the show, the immediate impact was clear. The media, always quick to capitalize on any news involving Amy, voraciously embraced the transformation. Some critics and journalists saw the change as a necessary act of self-affirmation, an evolution for an artist who had always had the courage to defy expectations. Others, however, were more critical, accusing Amy of abandoning the image that had made her famous. For many, the Back to Black and Rehab artist seemed to have changed irreversibly, and this generated a mixed response. Some believed the change could alienate her from her fan base, while others saw it as proof that Amy was evolving and becoming even more authentic. Despite the mixed reaction, there was no denying that that night had given Amy a new form of visibility. Her transformation didn't make her disappear from the media spotlight, but rather repositioned her as an even more complex figure. She went from being seen solely as a troubled diva or tormented artist to one who was constantly evolving. This brought new attention to her career and at the same time a new set of expectations. Suddenly, the public was curious not just about what Amy was doing, but about who she was becoming. In a way, Amy's shift became a resistance movement within the music industry. The music industry, often focused on keeping artists within a comfortable and predictable box, was forced to confront Amy's most authentic, uncompromising, unvarnished version. She made it clear that fame didn't define her and that she wouldn't conform to the simplistic narratives the media tried to create about her. For some artists, this would be a risky choice, risking losing fans, alienating sponsors, and questioning their own role in the industry. However, Amy seemed to be taking a step toward freedom, putting her art and her own truth ahead of commercial demands. Over time, this shift had a significant impact on her music. Audiences were now more interested in seeing how Amy's personal transformation would be reflected in her new compositions and her stage presence. Once an artist known for her vulnerability and intense moments of self-destruction, she now became a more reflective, perhaps more serene woman who seemed to be on a journey of self-discovery and healing. Her new songs, which emerged after this transformation, were deeply influenced by this phase of reinvention, with lyrics that spoke no longer of struggling with addictions or the ghosts of the past, but of self-acceptance and the search for freedom. Her career, which had previously seemed to be in a cycle of ups and downs, was now taking a new direction. The transformation reflected not only her personal life, but also her desire to leave a lasting legacy in music. She wanted to be remembered as an artist who wasn't afraid to reinvent herself, who didn't confine herself to an image, and who, above all, allowed herself to evolve. And while the music industry and fans may have been initially divided, time has shown that this change, far from harming her career, actually strengthened it. Amy Winehouse was making her mark in a completely new, more authentic, and paradoxically, more accessible way, by opening the space for others to allow themselves to change as well. Ultimately, the radical change Amy made at that show not only redefined her career, but also cemented her position as one of the most audacious and authentic artists of her generation. The transformation she experienced became not only an act of personal resistance, but an example of how often true art lies in reinventing oneself, not to please others, but to be true to oneself. Amy Winehouse's journey, marked by ups and downs, came to be seen no longer as a trajectory of self-sabotage, but as an example of resilience and the courage needed to rebuild, and above all, to remain true to oneself, regardless of external expectations. After the transformation that had shaken the audience, Amy Winehouse addressed the audience once again, this time with a more personal, intimate tone. That night was about to become a milestone, not only in her career, but also in her own journey of self-discovery. At a moment when she seemed more vulnerable than ever, Amy paused in her performance, stepping back slightly from the microphone, and with a softer, more introspective gaze, she began to speak in a way that seemed to come from a very deep place. "I know you've seen me go through a lot. Things that perhaps you never knew how much they affected me," she began, her voice firm but thick with an emotion that was hard to hide. "I've always been on this relentless search for something that I didn't even know what it was. I tried to find answers in the wrong places, at the wrong times, and in the end, I lost myself along the way. But this change tonight isn't about hiding or running away from who I was. It's about finally finding myself." The silence in the room was profound. Fans, accustomed to seeing Amy as a fiery, assertive woman, now found themselves faced with a completely different artist, more reflective and vulnerable. The revelation of her personal journey, the way she seemed to have overcome the internal and external conflicts that had always surrounded her public persona, brought a palpable humanity to her persona. Amy was no longer simply the irreverent artist everyone expected. She was revealing herself as a woman in the process of healing and personal transformation. She continued, "I spent years trying to be what everyone wanted me to be, and it wasn't always easy. You know, people saw me as a rebel, a lost artist, and sometimes I let myself believe that. I believed that the only way to be accepted was to always be on top, always be there, being that woman that everyone loved. But no one knew what I was going through inside. Today, I've decided that I'm not going to carry that image anymore. I am more than what you see, and you are also more than the labels they put on you." These words were a balm for both her and the audience. Amy was indeed in a moment of self-discovery and acceptance. The radical transformation she had undergone wasn't just an aesthetic change or a play on her public image, but a manifestation of a deeper process of self-transcendence. She was giving herself the right to be who she truly was, without the pressure of external expectations. For an audience that had always seen Amy as a complex and often tumultuous artist, this statement was both revelatory and liberating. The impact of this personal reflection also led many of her fans to begin to see themselves differently. She was not only creating space for her own evolution, but for the evolution of all those who admired her. Amy was inviting others to reflect on their own lives, to free themselves from the expectations that society and even they themselves had imposed. She had transformed her personal journey into a collective manifesto of acceptance and freedom. "Tonight, everything changed," she said, her voice softer now, like a promise of renewal. "But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for me, to become the person I truly am and to live the life I've always wanted to live, without fear, without regret. Because the only way to move forward is to be true to who I am." The audience, previously divided between surprise and confusion, now seemed completely absorbed by Amy's sincerity. She was more human, more vulnerable, and her strength seemed to come from her raw, direct honesty. It was as if she had finally made peace with herself And this acceptance of who she truly was the key to a transformation that was not only artistic, but deeply personal. These words and this personal reflection marked the culmination of the evening. Amy was no longer trapped in the public persona everyone had created for her, nor the tumultuous artist the media loved to exploit. She was in a moment of renewal, seeking inner peace and freedom, something that had never before seemed possible for the woman so many saw as a tormented figure. This was the true radical shift, not an external transformation, but an internal revolution, something that would make her live according to her own truth, regardless of labels or the expectations of others. And in doing so, she became, in fact, freer than she had ever been. When the show ended, the audience filed out in silence, absorbing what had just happened. That night would become a landmark in Amy Winehouse's career and at the same time, a milestone in music history, not only for her artistic boldness, but for her courage in exposing her vulnerability and taking control of her own narrative. Amy's radical transformation, which had so confused and surprised so many, was in fact a celebration of freedom, a statement that she would not be defined by the stereotypes society had created around her image, but by the woman she had finally decided to be. The impact of that night would reverberate for a long time. The media, which had fed off her crises and controversies, now found itself confronted with a new narrative. The story of a woman who, despite all the challenges, found strength and authenticity amidst the chaos. Amy had left behind the role of the tormented artist and reinvented herself as an even more powerful, more complex, more human figure. Her transformation not only redefined her career, but also altered the way she would be remembered. Amy was no longer trapped in the troubled girl image the media tried to impose on her. She was no longer just a muse of pain and self-destruction. Instead, she became a symbol of resilience, of someone who, despite mistakes and failures, rose and rose again, always searching for her truth. Her courage to transform herself before the eyes of the world served as an inspiration to many. Those who saw her as an icon of authenticity began to see in her a lesson in the importance of self-improvement and constant reinvention. And it wasn't just her fans who were touched. Her transformation inspired other artists who began to question the images and narratives the music industry tried to impose on them. Amy showed the world that true art comes from authenticity and vulnerability, not from a saleable version of the artist. She taught us that reinvention doesn't have to be forced, nor does it have to follow a script. She was living her own truth, and that was more than enough to leave a lasting mark on pop culture. Amy Winehouse's legacy, now seen in a new light, has become a blend of undeniable talent, emotional complexity, and the courage to face life head-on. That night, with its radical transformation, wasn't just a performance. It was an assertion of her right to self-discovery and freedom. It was the culmination of a journey of inner searching, where she finally embraced who she truly was, without fear of being misunderstood. She not only changed the course of her career, but also opened a new chapter in music history, showing everyone that true greatness comes from living without masks and without compromise. Amy Winehouse left an immortal legacy, not only for the music she touched us, but for the way she challenged us to free ourselves from the expectations others have of us. Her transformation was an act of reinvention, resistance, and above all, self-liberation. She may have left the stage sooner than we would have liked, but her story and the lesson of courage she left us will continue to inspire generations of artists and fans around the world. Amy Winehouse unintentionally became a symbol of authenticity, showing that however difficult it may be, true freedom lies in allowing yourself to be who you truly are.